In what is only the third time in United States history, the House of Representatives have used their Article 2, Section 4 powers to pass articles of impeachment against the president. They passed two articles of impeachment, the first article passing with a 230 to 197 vote, and the second article passing with a 229 to 198 vote. Now, in the first article, every Republican voted no, with two Democrats defecting, Colin Peterson and Jeff Van Drew. Now, Jeff Van Drew, if you haven't heard yet, is planning to switch to the Republican Party in any case. So, sort of his first move in that direction. And Tulsi Gabbard voted present. On the second article, we had again Colin Peterson, Jeff Van Drew, and Tulsi Gabbard voting present. But then, in addition, we had Jared Golden of, I believe, Maine, voting no on the second charge for obstruction of Congress, but he did vote yes on the first article for abuse of power. Now, when it comes to the issue of impeachment, I've made a few videos on it, so you can check those out if you want to. But when it comes to the issue of impeachment, generally the left is slightly divided. So there's generally like sort of three camps, right? So you have your first camp, which is absolutely like very enthusiastic about impeachment, and maybe even a few of those are, in my opinion, somewhat deluded into thinking that Republican senators are going to see the evidence and come have a come to Jesus moment and change their mind, and Donald Trump will be removed from office. That's a pretty small group, and then I think the largest section of the left is pretty in favor of impeachment. They say, hey, look, Donald Trump, he did something wrong. He needs to be impeached, even if we know that it's going to lose in the Senate. It's really important that we do pass articles of impeachment. And then there's sort of the third group, where I think Kyle Kulinski is one of these, who's sort of like, yes, he did something wrong, but hey, look, I mean, Kyle says, for instance, like, leave it to the Democrats, right? Leave it to the Democrats to fight a battle which they know that they cannot win. And so there's a kind of hesitance to it. They'll say, like, yes, Donald Trump clearly did something wrong, but it's not going to pass. It's probably it's a bad strategy. Donald Trump is just going to run around and say, hey, look, look, the Senate acquitted me, and it could sort of, there could be a serious backlash in the election. Now, personally, I kind of take a middle road between the second view and the third view. I think, like, yes, he did do something bad, and personally, I think, yes, that merits impeachment. But I don't go all the way to say, just because the Senate isn't going to remove him from office, that automatically means you shouldn't then impeach. I kind of think, well, look, as long as the polls are good enough to the point where you can pass articles of impeachment and then not have massive sort of political backlash, then it's generally warranted to say, hey, we need to stand up on principle. Because look, we can't have, in my opinion, I do think that even like, the argument is, hey, look, it's Ukraine military aid. Obama, for instance, didn't actually Obama didn't have the military aid going, and then Trump enacted bringing the military aid to Ukraine, basically in order to make it clear that he was anti-Russia, because Democrats were turning around and hitting him on Russia all the time, right? And so then when he does pull back on the aid, all of a sudden it's, oh my gosh, you're pro-Russia, right? But in any case, yeah, I understand that. I understand that point, that like the military aid isn't as isn't like super sacred or whatnot. But I do think that you don't want to set that as a precedent. Like, hey, you can withhold military aid in order to investigate your political opponent, or at least have an announcement of an investigation. So I'm kind of in the middle of that. I think, look, if the polls start getting really bad, then the Democrats should back out. And there is a possible way to back out. So earlier this morning, and then right after the impeachment hearing, Nancy Pelosi confirmed that it's a possibility, which is that if in the Senate it is not altogether clear that there's going to be what the Democrats term a fair trial, which would be being able to call the witnesses that they want, the Democrats possibly, I do confess this is unlikely, but the Democrats possibly, they're holding open the door to the possibility of essentially with not sending over the articles of impeachment to the Senate, if if, for example, they're not able to get what they want in terms of witnesses. So that's a possible way out if the polls start looking bad. So let's take a quick look at the polls, actually. So I have them pulled up. This is just from 538, which, you can criticize Nate Silver how you want, but when it comes to just their polling data, it's decent. So uh, at the sort of orange there is support, and don't support is the purple. You can see here that it's kind of narrowed there. So um, for obviously for the longest time before impeachment was a real talk, they don't support impeachment was the majority, and then once this Ukraine stuff came out, impeachment became a popular position, and more people supported it than didn't support it, and that is still the case. However, we have been starting to see some polls where it's starting to flip a little bit. I think in general, you're going to need to have at least 45% of the public supporting impeachment if it's going to be a serious a real possibility where the Democrats aren't going to have like a massive kind of political backlash. Otherwise, if support for impeachment really drops much below 45%, especially down to 40%, I do think that you're going to see Democrats start to get really worried, and there is a real possibility that they might kind of back off of this whole impeachment thing because there could seriously be a kind of political backlash. Again, like I think it is important to make the point, hey, look, you can't do this and pass impeachment. But I also understand that, it's really important to win in 2020. And it is possible that there could be a backlash if the American people are not sold on it. So now the other thing, though, is if you actually look down here at the bottom, you can actually switch over to um, here the question of only polls asking whether to begin impeachment, and so it actually becomes a lot more popular. So that, I think, is really important. So when you actually look at the number of Americans who think yes, it should be that we could begin the impeachment process, 52% support and only 42% disagree with the idea of beginning the impeachment process. So that is really good news, and I think that those numbers I'm not going to say they're more important than the overall impeachment numbers, but they are, I think, we should look at those numbers as well when thinking about whether or not there's going to be a massive backlash on the issue of impeachment. The last thing I just want to really briefly touch upon is, right now we're having a debate over whether or not the Senate will be capable of having a fair trial, whether or not Mitch McConnell will be willing to bring in the relevant witnesses necessary in order for the senators to be capable of even making an informed decision. Right, which, by the way, this is essentially exactly the criticism that that the House Republicans were criticizing the House Democrats for. Right, so if you watch any of the floor debate, you'll know that the House Republicans, essentially their stock criticism was how the Democrats had wanted to impeach from the beginning. You wanted to do this from the beginning. Now you have an opportunity, and so you're doing it. They weren't ever debating on the substance of it. They were just saying you wanted to do this from the beginning. Therefore, it's somehow bad without ever actually debating on the question itself. But that aside, so Republicans are doing the same thing that Democrats are doing, right? But the interesting thing I would suggest is not the hypocrisy of it, right? The interesting thing is that I'm not surprised by it, and you're not surprised by it either. We all knew going into this whole thing that it was going to be a partisan affair, but we should be surprised by the fact that you know our representatives are not capable of being objective. So if you ever read the Federalist Papers, you'll know in Federalist 65, Hamilton argues that the Senate is going to be the body best capable of having the trial for the president, right? And the reason why he thinks this is because the states are the largest geographically, right? And so you're going to have the most industries, the most interest groups, and they're going to be sort of jostling with one another, and sort of ambition will counteract ambition. They'll balance each other out. And so states are going to be most capable of being objective, right? Of course, though, that's not how it worked out, right? But there's two things he didn't account for, right? The rise of long distance sort of trade networks connecting the whole country, and the rise of long distance communication. If you watch my last video on impeachment, I talk about this a little bit more in depth. I'll put it in the little doohickey in the corner if you want to check it out. But the reason I bring this up again on the issue of impeachment is I think, it's really important to talk about the structural issues, right? And so those two implications led to the rise of large national political parties, which the way that our system was set up, the way our institutions were built, really were not meant to accommodate political parties who, rise and fall based on national things, right? So something happens to the president, down ballot across the country, the representatives of that country are going to, face consequences, right? So it ends up being that we're not capable of our systems do not structure, or excuse me, do not function the way that they are meant to. So what I want to bring up to you is, we can't just sit around and think about impeachment solely as a news event, solely as something that happened, and think about the specific things. I think we also should take pause on this issue of impeachment and think about the broader structural issues going on, because Donald Trump is such an absolute idiot, right? I mean, this guy is so dumb, but somehow he's willing to, according to the second article of impeachment, obstruct Congress. Why is he capable of even obstructing Congress? He's so dumb. But this president, he's the first president ever to deny every single subpoena, right? It's the first White House to ever do this. Why is it the case that the president is able to deny the subpoena of a democratically elected body like Congress? Right? Like, why is that even possible? I talk again. I briefly bring it up in my last video, so I'm not going to sort of rehash it. But I guess what I'm getting at is, it's I want you to take pause and think a little bit about the structural things. Now, we might disagree on the structural things. That's a little bit of my analysis of it. And maybe one day I'll make a video going a little bit more into my views on the analysis of some of the structural issues going on. But I don't want you to just stop and see this as a news event. I want you to see it as a structural issue, and think about it in that way. So anyway, that is the video. If you like the video, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thanks.